Lucas, what does being a session player mean to you?
Wow, being a session player means a lot of things, and it's constantly evolving. I think at the end of the day, being a session musician or a session player means serving the song and making sure that the artist is happy and the producer is happy at the end of the day. Whatever you got to do to make that happen, and that's what I do, and that's kind of what it means to me. Serve the song, serve the artist, serve the producer.
Absolutely. And when you're in a position where you're in the studio as a musician, a lot of times we get pulled into different types of projects. And you mentioning the importance of serving the artist, I think is really great, because a lot of preparation can go into you being prepared to walk into the studio and understand the history of that artist, their background, their musical tastes, and style, and then figure out how your practices and your own instincts can support and serve them artistically, but also the song itself. I think that's such a great point. Where did your inspiration to play an instrument start?
Oh, well, to play an instrument, I started out I think I was 12 years old. I saw a movie called School of Rock with Jack Black. I don't know if, that's
Yeah, man.
I don't know if it's considered a classic now, but shoot, it's been a while. But I saw that movie and I saw Jack Black with that SG and I'm like, I got to do that, and kind of just went from there, learning about different other musicians and digging through your parents, record collection and making friends with people who play other instruments and start playing in bands together in garages and stuff like that. And you go from there.
Absolutely. Did your education on your instrument start with just picking up a cheap guitar and kind of strumming along and figuring out how to play, or did you have traditional lessons or a guitar instructor like early on?
Yeah, I was pretty fortunate. I had a guitar instructor in the first year, and then kind of went on and off of having a formal teacher. And then when I was about 15, I was super blessed and fortunate to meet a guy by the name of Michael Jacques in the South Florida area. He's a phenomenal musician and guitar player. He's been, I say he is my guitar teacher. He still is in a way, but I would say he's like a mentor, a career, life. I was really blessed to be able to meet him, and I still go to him for advice. Maybe not just guitar advice now, but just like life advice. And I think that kind of was really helpful. And I was really fortunate. I think when I started playing guitar, that was when YouTube first came along. So, those first videos of people uploading, themselves teaching, those first YouTube guitar tutorials, I was fortunate enough to be able to be at the right place at the right time, at the right skill set, to be able to get a lot from that. And I think, so I would consider YouTube to be a teacher, and still is, I'm still there, like looking at tutorials, and still to this day,
Absolutely. That's awesome, man. Mentorship is such an important part of our craft in the recording industry, because you can learn a lot through music theory books or through having, someone that teaches you just the technical aspect of, playing your instrument. But there's so much that you need to learn through, the business and the career path, and how do you get into finding these opportunities once you learn the technical side of your instrument. And having a mentor is so beneficial in that process. How did you meet him, and how did that relationship develop?
It was just like, I think, how you meet people nowadays, through a friend. Randomly, a friend of mine that I met was taking guitar lessons from him as well. And we just got together, and I called him up and he came over to my house. It's funny to think about how things work nowadays. That wasn't that long ago. MySpace was a thing. We're still a couple years away from smartphones, but like now it's like you can meet anybody anywhere, through Instagram, YouTube, whatever, TikTok, but it's still like a word of mouth thing. And it's funny to say that now because it's not that long ago, but it's like things move so fast,
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. It's always changing. And so initially he was your guitar instructor. When did that process turn into more how you considered him a mentor as opposed to just a teacher?
I mean, pretty early on, it feels like that was like his teaching method, not just working on music, but life influences music and music influences life. So, we talked about philosophy and just life in general. Like, he was very instrumental in me moving to LA because, as a young person, you think about going to college or not, still the number one school that people think of when they think of music is Berkeley. And that's such an incredible school. And I had so many friends who went there, but he kind of pushed me, hey, maybe move to LA and find a school there, because that's you can get a great education and also get started on your career. And that was like the most important thing that I got, because I was able to get started kind of before maybe most people if they went to a town like Boston that's not as music central. So that was something that was like really important. And we always still again talk about life, and he helps me out to this day.
Man, well, that's really great advice, and obviously it's it's specific to certain individuals. Some people are going to benefit from that path of taking a little bit more time to really figure things out. But it sounds like you had a really clear intention that you knew this is what you wanted to do. And for folks like that, I definitely agree. My path was very similar in moving to Nashville. A town that is one of the big three, and really within the recording side of things, one of the biggest markets. And it made sense for me to be able to dive in at a younger age because I was really clear on what I wanted to, do, and it was really helpful for me. Sounds like it was for you to kind of just dive right into that community so you could start building it while you were getting your education. So you went to a school in LA once you moved there, right?
Yeah, I did. Yeah. So I went to Musicians Institute, which is in Hollywood. I was there for about a year, and it was a wonderful experience. I'm super grateful for that, and I owe a lot of the success or gigs and tours and studio experience that I have to them.
Absolutely. Well, that from what I know of the school, I've heard of so many great people that have come out of it, and it seems like their program is really centric on career building. Whereas opposed to a university might be, you have to get your general eds and work through all the process until you get to, your junior, senior year before you start really doing what you want to be doing. And with a school like Musician Institute and the other schools that are within that category, you can dive right in to the practice. Did you find that was your experience?
Yeah, I really think that, like you said, they're very focused on career building and really thinking like, hey, you got to make a living, right? You got to make a career out of this. It's not just important the knowledge, but how you apply it. And I think they were very cool with that side of things and being very hands-on. And I think also just kind of realizing that, like, what I tell, like you may get this question a lot. Should I go to music school? Should I not go to music school? Which music school should I go to? And I think, like, to your point, it's very depends on the person and what they want to do. But what I do tell people is, like, making the best use out of it is not just going to class, obviously go to class, but networking and being like, hey, these people are the people that are going to be working when I am out there too. So making those friendships was super instrumental. And the fact that we had like-minded people around the same time and we're there together 24 hours, whatever, how many hours we're there a day, I still work with those people and they still call me and I call them.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great part of education is the relationships that you build through the process, and probably just as valuable, if not more valuable, than the technical side of things, that you learn, because those are the things that can follow you throughout your whole career. So you also went through the music business program there as well. And what was your thought in that? You're a guitar player, you want to be a professional musician. Why was it important for you to learn about the music business, and how has that impacted your career now?
Yeah, it was one of those things that was like, I was fortunate to, again, with my mentor Michael, and also with my cousin who's a musician in Brazil. That's where I'm from. I was born in Brazil. I sort of learned pretty early on and saw through them how important the business side was. Obviously, like, again, the skills and the knowledge is, you have to have that. You can't just, there's no faking it. Like, you have to be able to play and do your job well. But it also is like learning how to make money and how the business works, because there's so much that goes into it. You have to learn that. You have to know how to navigate and present yourself in a professional way. And that was super important. That time that I spent in the music business program was probably just as important as the playing.
Absolutely. I agree. Outside of the program, with your interest in the business, have you ever found any books or other resources to learn about the business side of things as it relates to your career?
I'm going to have to think on that. I don't know if there are any books in particular that I read on the business. I think a lot of what I learned was just from, I know one of them that gets tossed around a lot, and I don't want to refer something that I haven't read, but I know that the book called Everything You Need to Know About the Music Business is, like, everyone mentions that. I should probably read it, but I know that that's something that everyone says is a great book.
Yeah, that's definitely a great book, and it was one that I had to read. It was part of one of my music business classes, and it
Okay.
seems that at a lot of schools that book has been utilized for years. And the great thing about that book is that they're constantly updating it. So it's not like a book that was written 20 years ago, and as we talked about, the business is always changing so quickly, and it's updated consistently. So if someone goes to check out that book, you definitely want to get the latest edition of it. So when you got out of done with that program, what were the next steps in your career? Take us through your journey.
Yeah, for sure. So coming back a little bit before, when I was growing up, I always used to read about session musicians in like Guitar World magazine, and I always used to see that, like, be like, oh my God, that's so amazing how all these people can play in all these records and make a living, and that's their job, and they play with a pop artist one day, R&B artist the next day, and that's amazing. And I never, not to doubt myself, but I never felt like that was something that I was like, can I do that? I didn't think I could. I kind of wanted to, I tell people this, like, I wanted to be John Mayer. I wanted to play guitar and write songs and sing them, right? So when I got to LA, that's kind of what I did. And luckily, very quickly realized that my talent level was not to the talent of John Mayer. I can't write a song like John Mayer. I can't sing like that. And obviously he's an amazing guitar player. Sort of when I realized that, my first session opportunity came up around the same time. And before I moved to LA, my mentor, Michael, said to me, he said, listen, I know you want to play guitar. I know you want to sing. I know you want to write songs, but be open to things. If someone asks you to produce a song for them, do it. If someone asks you to play guitar on a song for them, do it. If anyone asks you to, help them promote a show and book a show, do it. Be open, because you never know what you're going to be good at. So I took that advice, and I still do to this day. And someone asked me, hey, do you want to play guitar on this session? I'm like, great. Little did I know that first session that I said yes to was for a producer named Stewart, who, has done Justin Bieber, Rihanna. It was for an artist that was signed to Interscope. I walked in blindly, like not having a clue. They said, be here at this address. And it went well. Like once I realized what was going on, I'm like, uh-oh, like, am I going to sink or swim? And I swam. They called me back, multiple times after that. And so many things came from that one session of me just saying yes, and when I tell people that, I say yes, but also say yes to things you can do. Like, someone hit me up and said, hey, can you play bassoon on this track? I'm like, no, can't play bassoon. But if they're like, can you play bass? I'm like, well, the first time someone asked me that, I'm like, I'm not an amazing bass player, but I think I can do it. So I practiced. I'm like, yeah, I can do it. So that opens doors. So from that session, it sort of snowballs. You meet, managers or artists, and they're like, oh, come to another session I have with this other producer, or, hey, I got a live show. Can you play guitar? And that, snowballs into more opportunities from then. If you keep doing a good job and work hard and be prepared, and that's kind of how things go, and just went on from there.
That's incredible, man. So that first session that you got asked to play on, how did you get asked to be involved in it?
So it was for Stewart, right? It was his artist, but the producer who was producing the song was a guy named Jonas Sheberg. At the time, he had already done some awesome things, but he's an insanely talented producer and way even more famous now. I think he did one of the Fall Out Boy songs that like kind of resurged their career. And I was downstairs neighbor with a woman who was one of his managers or helped to manage him. And we met, literally she saw me, walking out of my apartment with a guitar one day, and she had an artist she was managing as well. We started working together, and she was like, hey, we need a guitar player. Can you do this? And I said, yeah.
And so just being in a position where you understand what it is that you want to accomplish, you put the work in to build your skill set. So once that opportunity comes, you're ready to swim, as you said, when you get thrown in the sea.
For sure.
That's incredible. And so you mentioned also understanding when you need to say no to things, which is an important thing, because definitely agree we want to say yes to everything that we have the capability to do. So in the cases where you can't, I think it can be really valuable to build a network of other players where you might be able to refer someone to, and then that whole idea of the referral process, you have someone that comes to you that maybe asks you for something that you don't have the capability to do, but you know someone great for that. So for that project, you can push them that way. That person that asked you about it now sees you as a more valuable asset for them. And then that person that you referred it to, you've strengthened your relationship with them. So an opportunity can come along. Have you found that to happen along the course of building your relationships within the industry?
Absolutely. It's so important to have that network of people, again, not just to get gigs, but to give gigs. I find that like it's like that new Radical song, you get what you give, right? So like if you can refer people and give them opportunities as well, whether it's because you have a scheduling conflict or you're like, listen, I'm not the best person for this job, and you refer someone else, like you may think, oh, well, I lost that gig. Well, no, it'll come back. You know what I mean? Because like the universe, I don't know what it is. The music business universe works in that funny way where
Yep.
things just like it comes back around, whether good or bad. So it's super important. And also a network of people to just help. Like, for example, I had a friend who my nylon guitar broke one day and I needed it for a session. I had a friend, I was like, can I borrow your nylon guitar? He helped me out. Or like I had a friend call me and say, hey, Lucas, you do rock guitars really well. Can I get your input on this? How would you record this part? And I helped them. We all help each other and it goes in a circle.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's such a strong community within our industry, which is great. And it's awesome to have so much support. We all want to see our colleagues do well, and everyone supporting one another can really help the whole industry grow and become better. So as you started getting into session playing, were there any things that come to mind that you learned early on about what to do or what not to do in the case of approaching playing on a record?
Absolutely. It's funny because around the time that, so I would say this. So, the first thing that always comes to mind is serve the song. Like I said in the beginning, I think us not just guitar players, us musicians, we practice so much. We learn all the scales, all the licks, all the chords, but just because you know all the scales and licks and chords doesn't mean you have to use them. It's all about serving the song. Sometimes it's just a simple chord strum or, a simple little 1 note, 2 note pattern that makes the song the best of what it is. Because remember, the vocal is always the most important part. I always say, keep it simple and serve the song. That's always like the most important thing. And if you do that, you're going to get called back. I would also say like learning how to play with a click. Very, very, very important. Got to know the click. And knowing, your gear. I don't think you necessarily, as guitar players, we always like the vintage gear. We always like the expensive gear. Gear is important. Gear needs to work. It needs to be at a certain level where it needs to function and not break. And you need to know your gear and make it work for you, but you don't necessarily need to have a $20,000 guitar. It's just something that sounds good and that you can make sound good and that is gonna, translate on the record.
Absolutely. That's great advice. So when it comes to developing your instincts for the part that you're going to play, where you mentioned, understanding when it makes sense to do something more complicated or when just creating a texture or an atmosphere is going to be the thing. Where do you think those instincts started to be developed from? Did it come from you just listening to records? Did it come from you recording yourself? What was the process that led to you starting to be able to have more of like a gut instinct for hearing a track and then knowing what your role needs to be?
That's a great question. It always varies by, the producer, the artist, and also, the style of music that you're playing. I would say listening to records and knowing what's on the radio is so important because like people, like producers will ask you for a certain sound. They'll say like, for example, like a big example is like Daft Punk was huge for a long time when they came back with, Random Access Memories. Everybody wanted that Nile Rodgers thing going on, so that was like a big thing. When I started the session world, it's funny because when I started, guitar was like, now you hear it on the radio all the time. It's crazy. Back when I started, it was kind of like out. Like I think Teenage Dream was like one of the biggest songs in which that had that, that Dr. Luke, 2 note guitar kind of thing, and everybody wanted that, but it wasn't what it is now. So knowing what's happening on the radio and what has happened is like super important. It's like learning licks. Like when you go to solo, you learn licks from your favorite people. It's kind of that same thing. And then communicating, asking the producer, what are you hearing on this? Do you want it to be simple? Do you want it to be complicated? And I think as you work with producers and artists multiple times, you start kind of knowing like what they want, this producer doesn't like this thing. This artist likes this thing. I know that like I have an artist that I work with, like she does not like the wah pedal, doesn't like it, will never like it. I don't touch it. You know what I mean? I have a certain producer, like I have this like Mellotron guitar pedal. He loves it. So every time I'm there, I turn it on and we get going. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So, and you develop an instinct for that. And what I would say to also to add to that is like, don't feel like you have to play everything. You know, like if they're happy and you just strummed chords, cowboy chords on acoustic guitar, you did a good job.
Absolutely. Yeah, that communication, is so important. And I think that there's a important thing to mention with that and how you were describing it is just being really aware. So understanding or asking questions, but also listening and not just saying, "Oh, okay, I kind of think what you're saying, but I'm gonna try this." But being really aware of what they're asking for, and then being educated enough on the current trends, sounds, and older trends, and just musically well versed to where they can give you an example or a reference and you can say, oh, okay, I get that. So when you hear, say, a new sound on the radio and a sound that you're like, man, that's really cool. I'm not sure, though, how to create that. What's the sort of process that you might go through to figure that out?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, YouTube, that's always a great one. It's interesting because we do have that resource now. It's like, I think about back, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, like you had to figure it out for yourself. I think YouTube is a great source in Google. Like, I know it sounds weird, but it's like, why not? Making it easy. I don't think things have to be hard, but I'll listen to it. And especially if it's a guitar sound, I'll try to like figure out like, okay, who's the producer on this track? Who played on this? Because you can kind of like deduce, by sort of process of elimination. This isn't a guitar specific thing, but like, for example, I had to recreate Blinding Lights by The Weeknd, right? Like an artist that I work with, one of the, so I had to recreate it from scratch. So I thought about it. I was like, okay, cool. Who produced it? Max Martin. Okay, cool. Max Martin probably has analog synths, right? So I probably have to use some sort of analog synth or emulation. There's a specific, it's a 80s style thing. So what drum machines were popular? So those kind of things really help. It would be the same thing, if we're talking about Daft Punk. Oh, it's like a 70s style record. Now Rogers played on it. Oh, I see he plays a Strat all the time. And he uses this specific amp, that kind of thing, kind of going backwards and being a detective.
Yeah, man. Yeah, just investigate it until you find the solution. That's awesome.
Exactly. The knowledge is out there. We have it on the palm of our hands. We just gotta find it.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I mean the knowledge is so accessible now. But understanding how important it is to go and seek out that knowledge, because it can be a lot of fun to just sit in our studios and experiment with the equipment that we have, or just look up new sounds for the sake of doing it. But doing it with some intention can really help to prepare you to be able to walk into that room and be asked for something and be able to get to it quickly. Now in Nashville, the production process when we're in a tracking session, a lot of sessions are done with a tracking session with multiple players in the room, and generally people have to get the sounds pretty quickly. Now the vibe out in LA can sometimes be a little more slow paced, but how would you say that it might differentiate from having how much time do you have in the studio when a producer says, hey, I'm going for this type of thing, for you to be able to dial in that sound and have it ready to go?
That's a great observation. It's very differently paced out here rather than Nashville. Most sessions, we still do like the live tracking sessions here. It's just not as common, but they're still done. If I were to do, so I approach everything different, right? So like if I were to do a live tracking session with a band, I would prepare all of my sounds in advance and kind of like advanced troubleshoot ahead of time. So essentially, like if I'm doing a record with a pop artist, what sound do I think that I'm going to be asked to do? So I'll have multiple distorted sounds, multiple clean sounds, multiple reverb sounds. That way I have at least a building block. If someone says, I want this kind of thing, I was like, okay, cool. I have something that's close to that, and I'll tweak it to make it what they want to hear. And I'll bring, all my gear. I always tell people, bring multiple of everything. Always have backup strings, picks, cables. The motto I go by is like, if you have two, you have one. If you have one, you have none. Prepare for things to break at the worst possible time. Because they will. I don't know what it is. They just do. And if you're prepared, you can, fix it, no problem. It's technology after all. And I would say on the other sessions where it's just me and the producer and the artist, they usually like, especially for the pop stuff, to do things in their DAW. Like I'll still bring my Kemper and I'll still bring some stuff, but they usually like things to be done there. So knowing Guitar Rig, knowing Waves Tool Rack, all those like CLA, all of those plugins, so that oh, there's a clean setting that I know is going to fit what they want. this is where it is, find it. Usually those sessions are a little bit more mellow.
And so something that you mentioned, which is something that I've experienced with you so far with the track that we're about to work on, is pre-production. And I love how your mind goes to pre-production. And I'm sure that comes from being a producer as well, you know. But it's fairly common for me to hire a musician and for me to just know that they're really good at that thing, and they're going to come in and they're going to hear the song that day, and we're going to work on it. It's a little bit more challenging sometimes to get players to want to prep for things ahead of time because, you know, they got back-to-back sessions every day and, you know, not necessarily, you know, enough time to do that, or they choose to not necessarily fit in the time for that. But I love how you have an intention to make pre-production a priority. It helps you be able to deliver what the producer's looking for because you understand it, you know, before you get into it. And like you just said, you can start to prep some sounds and get some ideas together. Was there a point that you discovered how that was how important that was?
I think early on, you sort of understand that people communicate differently. Someone will say, and it still happens, and it's not a bad thing or anything. Their references are different than your references. So, for example, like I had a time where I had an artist, Becky G. She wanted one of her songs to, we were going to do a live thing, and she wanted like the intro, first verse and chorus of the song to be like nylon string kind of thing, right? And she sent me this reference of this classical flamenco player. I can't remember who the artist was, maybe Big Christina Aguilera. Like they were doing this like really intricate part. And she said, I want something like this. And I'm like, cool. So I came up with the thing and she's like, no, that's not it. And I'm just like, okay, let me just like simplify this, like, because it was kind of a complicated part. I was like, let me simplify this. And I just played like arpeggios and she's like, that's it. So like people don't communicate necessarily in the way that you think or in terms that you describe. They don't have the guitar knowledge that you have or the instrument knowledge that you have. So I find that like once you set expectations and say, what are you looking for? What are you hearing in your head? It makes the process so much easier. Because you could be thinking, I'm doing a great job. I'm doing all this thing. And then you send it to them and they're like, that's not what I wanted. And it's not that you did a bad job or that what you did was bad. It was just not what they were looking for. It was just a communication thing. Just be prepared.
Absolutely. And yeah, I mean, pre-production is so essential in my opinion and in my world as a producer, but to hear a musician, you know, focused on that, I think it's great advice for players that are trying to figure out, you know, how do I set myself apart in the experience that I'm going to give the producer or the artist or the client that's, you know, that's hiring me. And that's something that can really set yourself apart, you know, if that's not something that necessarily everybody's doing. And in the long term, it probably gives you a better assurance that at the end of the day, they're going to be stoked with what you did and, you know, want to call you back.
100%. I always tell people, go above and beyond. If you're, let's say, remote recording something, I'm working on a feature film that I'm playing guitar on. Composer asked me to record some guitars. I did 3 takes of everything because that gives them the opportunity to choose whatever they want. And they're happy that they got more than if you can give people more than what they asked for, you're always good to go. And they'll always call you back because they'll feel like they paid, you know, they got more than what they paid for.
So we talked about the importance of pre-production and, you know, being prepared in general. But sometimes we don't know when we need to be prepared for something. And something that I saw that recently had happened to you is you got a call to play on the song Love of My Life by J-Lo for that Marry Me movie that just came out recently. And it seemed like there was a pretty interesting story behind that. Can you tell me a little bit about how that opportunity come together and what you learned from it?
Yeah, totally. So that's definitely like a lot of lessons here. So for the past year, I was, or when this call came, I was in Florida. My dad was sick at the time, and I was there helping to take care of him. So I didn't have all my, you know, gear that I usually have. I just had like a cheap guitar and just my laptop. I didn't even have my Kemper or pedals or anything like that. And you know, I was like exhausted at the end of the day. I was like 9 p.m. or something. The producer hit me up and he said, hey, do you want to record these guitars? And I was like, and my first instinct was to say no. I mean, I was like, which is crazy because you're like, here's an opportunity to play guitar in a Jennifer Lopez song. I mean, huge opportunity. And my first instinct was to say no. I was just mentally and physically exhausted. But I was like, you know what? Something in my gut's telling me, play on this track. So I hyped myself up and did it and knocked it out. I didn't have all my gear. I recorded it on like a $500 guitar, PRS that was kind of not broken, but it wasn't set up properly because of the Florida humidity. It just like warps guitars, through Guitar Rig, $200 plugin. And I did it, during a time where I was, helping take care of my dad. That I'd record a little bit, check in on him, record a little bit. So it was definitely like a weird moment, but I'm like, all right, I'm going to get it done. And that's kind of the lesson of like always being prepared no matter what, and using the tools that you have to make it work for you. And also relationships. I've known that producer for 8 years and we've always worked together. Like we kind of lost touch for a little bit, reconnected before the pandemic. So I think that's important too. Always like networking with people, keeping up, but not networking like, hey, you got any gigs for me? Like checking in on people, always being like, hey, let's grab a coffee. Being friends with people, keeping that network tight, that friendship group tight is also like a big lesson.
Absolutely. So something else that you mentioned that I think is really, really important to touch on is understanding plugins and as they relate to guitar emulation and that sort of thing. And you also mentioned the Kemper. And that seems to be your rig now. You said you kind of got rid of a lot of the more traditional amps, I guess, for the emulation type stuff. And that has to do a lot with the sounds that you're asked for, as well as like the simplicity of it. Or what was the process for you to make that decision? And how have you found it to be important to really understand those digital tools within the style of music that you're called upon most often?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. I grew up, having Marshalls and a Marshall stack and wanting that JCM 800 sound all my life and also, those Fender cleans. And the reason I got rid of it, and I think I'm actually, after also speaking to you and just, I'm always thinking about gear. I'm sure you are too.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go back and just get like a smaller Fender. Just to have, because I was, I always had that big Fender DeVille was the amp I had, and it was like 60 pounds or 40 pounds. But the reason I got rid of it is two things. So I tore as well, and I found that the Kemper does such a good job, and it's so much easier to just plug in. And the front of house engineer is always happy because it's the same sound every night. It makes it a lot better, especially on those big pop tours. The audience is there to hear the artist. And I found that like, if you go to see Joe Bonamassa or Eric Clapton, part of what you're going to see is the vintage guitars and the amps and that tone. With the, fitting a guitar into a pop song, most people don't notice. And it's really more for the player and how that sounds. So I got used to that. And a lot of like churches here in LA or churches that I played with, they wanted like a clean stage. It's kind of the same thing. And the less noise you can make, the better. And as far as the plugins, something that was interesting is that like these plugins, like Guitar Rig and Tool Rack, they've become so accessible that so many people have them that it's become, I want to say like the sound of the pop records. Like I remember recording a guitar part for a hip hop record and I did it through an amp. And to me, I was like, oh, it sounds rich. And the producer heard it back and was like, that doesn't sound right. It sounds too good. Like I'm like, oh. So I just recorded the same thing through Guitar Rig. And he's like, yep, that's it. Right. So it's just like a sound that has in it. And it's all different things. If you're doing a rock record or a blues record or, like a record that calls for amps, use amps. And if you don't, if it's a hip hop or pop record or anything that calls for it, you use the plugins. And one thing that is cool about the plugins is that people change their minds so much, and having the ability to record a DI guitar, put a plugin on, and a month later or whatever, the producer's like, you know what? I don't like that sound anymore. Change it.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's great advice for how a track can kind of come together, throughout the process. And if you're doing it with an amp, you can't necessarily do that. If you are tracking with an amp, always great to run a DI signal separate just so you have it. And then you can go back to it if something changed. You can reamp it through a different amp. You can run it through a plugin. Really great thing to have. That's awesome, man. That's really great advice. And I think that what I pull from that is just understanding that you want to have a plethora of tools to pull out, and just to be able to serve the song in the way that it needs to, but also being open to expanding your horizons with or your passion around gear, and balancing that with your passion for being able to get work because the sounds and the style and what you're playing sounds like the radio or sounds relevant to what the producer's asking for. So you recognizing that, from a guitar player standpoint, your tone was incredible and you loved it, and that's how you wanted it to sound on that record, but the producer wanted it to sound like this type of thing, and that wasn't necessarily the holy grail of equipment. It was just the plugin that he was used to hearing, and that was the tone that he wanted to be able to fit into the track. And I think being open to that is such an important thing. How do you manage your own personal taste and don't necessarily want to say ego, but how do you control the personal musical ego with what you're being asked to do on a project? What's your mindset on that?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. And that is sort of like, I don't want to say, like, some people can't do that. They can't say, well, the producer wanted me to play it this way and I didn't like it, or they chopped up my part, or they, only used a little bit of what I did. And that happens, but I look at it as like the job of being a studio musician is like, I want almost like being like let's say you were going to build a house for somebody, right? And you went through the plans with them and you went through everything and they said, well, I like this and I don't like this and I want it this way. You're not going to be like, well, no, it has to be this way. It's like, it's your house. You want to build, you're going to live in the house. You're the one that has to go out and live in that house and have, and build your life there. Same thing with a song. The artist is the one that has to go out and sell the song, perform the song. So what is good to them is what is the final thing. And if I did that, whether that means me stacking 20 guitar parts or just doing one part, I did my job. And it's the same thing with the house. Some people want a simple house. Some people want an extravagant house with a bunch of rooms and crazy lights and stuff like that. And it's all about, at the end of the day, when I hear an artist say, I'm so stoked about the song, thank you for being a part of it. Your guitar parts made it better. I'm happy. Though I will say something funny that and again, you usually record more than what ends up on the record. That's just normal. I'm sure we do that with every instrument, vocals, drums, but sometimes I'll record a guitar part and the song will come out for like a year or 2 years. And when it finally comes out, I'm always like hesitant when I press play. I'm like, what did they keep? Did they keep anything? Was it like one chord that they kept? I'm always like, okay, here we go. So it's always like a little, roll of the dice, but it's always like such a good feeling hearing that, especially when it's like on Spotify playlists or the radio or whatever it is. It's like, it's a good feeling,
Absolutely. Man, that's such a great metaphor about building a house. And the phrase that I love I swear every contractor that I've ever worked with, when I've asked them for their opinion on like how we should do something, the guy goes, "Not my house." And I think maybe we should work on taking the role of the contractor a little bit, more often, or when we're in that position where we got to fight with our ego versus what the artist's vision might be, and that can be a challenging thing.
Totally.
Now the other thing is finding balance with that, because sometimes it can be helpful, depending upon your relationship with the artist and what your role is, whether that's just player or maybe player and producer, to push for something in a constructive way, but just to kind of say, hey, hear me out. Because sometimes they just haven't fully realized the vision of how something could fit into a track. Do you have any experiences or advice around how to navigate that type of conversation where you just feel like, I don't want to push the envelope here, and if they don't like it, they're saying they don't want this, but I really feel in my gut like this would probably work if they just gave me a moment to kind of make it happen. Do you have any techniques or approaches for how to navigate that?
Oh, absolutely, man. You're asking all the right questions here. That is a huge thing that happens quite a lot. What I say, I look at that as two sides. Sometimes you get asked to do something that in your head you're like, oh, that's not going to sound good. But what I always do is I always do it. I always say, listen, why not try? Because I could be wrong. I'm wrong all the time. So I will say, I think that may, now I won't tell them. I don't say that's not going to work. I'm saying, yeah, sure. Let's try it. We try it out. Sometimes you're like, oh man, that worked. Fantastic. And most of the time when it doesn't, they will say, oh yeah, that doesn't work. Or they may say, or you may think like, that's bad. And they're like, that's amazing. Then it's amazing. And if there is a part that I think is good, that is obviously like depending on the relationship, and that results in building trust. So I think that when you try their ideas, that builds trust, because that means that you're saying to them, I trust you and you trust me. So I would say, like, I won't say, hey, do you mind? I will say something along the lines, hey, do you mind if we try this idea? I was hearing something. If you say I'm hearing something and you do it, and sometimes you're like, that's amazing. Sometimes you're like, no, great. At least you tried. And that builds the trust. And the more you work with people, the more you can say, hey, can I try this out? I'm hearing this thing. The more they're open to it. The wrong way to go about that is say, no, I'm not going to try your idea. We're going to do it my way. That's not what you're being hired to do. You're being hired to do a service and then provide that extra thing that they may not have heard.
Absolutely. I love that perspective of building the trust, and thinking about it from that way is just so powerful, man. To be open to trying any of their ideas, and so you're building up that trust to the point where that now you know when the time is where you can say, hey, let me try this thing. And then they trust you as a result. And it's something that you don't even necessarily have to have a conversation about or try to push, because just naturally as human beings, as we build that trust, we're going to be more open to hearing things out from people that are open to hearing us out. And it just builds a stronger relationship.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So a really cool part of your career and background is getting into being a musical director, and then getting on tour and stuff. And you've been involved in so many different shows and tours. So how did those opportunities start to come about?
Yeah, absolutely. So it kind of all dates back to that first session that I did with Tricky Stewart and Jonas. You meet people and you meet a manager or an artist and they say, hey, come play on all these other records I'm doing. Yeah, let's do it. Hey, I got a live show. Do you want to play guitar on it? Great. And then you sort of find out that there is, like, in a touring artist world, in a team, there are so many different jobs that people have, and one of them is being a music director. Because for those people who don't know or not be may not be familiar, a music director is essentially like the producer of the live show, of the music of the live show. So, like, if you were to think about your favorite band, let's say you like Queen or Led Zeppelin, right? Like, those bands, they all sat down in a studio, wrote the music, and they all played on the record. So when it's time to go out and tour, they can all just go, okay, cool, we played on this, let's take the show on the road. With solo artists, that may not be the case. Sometimes you'll have 12 producers on a record. Sometimes you have 24, but sometimes it's just a couple, but they don't always go on the road. And you may have multiple session musicians that played on the record. So when it's time to take it live, you need someone that's going to oversee and know every part, know every little detail, and translate the record to the live show with transitions and hiring the band and making sure that the artist sounds really good and is happy. So that's kind of a role that was, like, bestowed upon me. I always was a very organized person growing up, and that's like a big part of it, and being able to manage different people. So when the opportunity came and someone said, we need a music director, I'm like, what's that? Like, oh, you kind of do this. I'm like, yeah, I could do that. I kind of did it for the bands I was in. I was always the one scheduling things, and being like running the rehearsals and stuff like that. So it was just an opportunity that came up, and going back to what my guitar teacher said, it's like, be open to things. And I said, yes. So it's fun. I love it.
That's great. And so for you to recognize that your personality and the character traits that you have fit well within that role, and then being open to to learn about it, and explore it, I think is a really strong thing. So as people are learning about different paths that their career might take, really knowing ourselves, which it sounds like your first guitar teacher and mentor really helped you with it from a young age, but really starting to understand who we are as human beings can help us to decide which opportunities are good to take on, which we might be a good fit for, and then how we can strengthen those areas in which we're strong at, and also strengthen the ones that could use some improvement in order for us to be really great at the role that that we want to play. That's such a great perspective that you have on that.
100%.
So as a music director, something that you've done a lot of is preparing tracks for shows. And you mentioned like preparing like a show intro, but I'm assuming you're also building out like show tracks and how that incorporates into things. Was that something that happened as a role of music director, or was that something that you got asked to as like a separate gig? Like, can you be the track person for this?
Yeah. So, again, there's so many different roles that go into live shows, and they sort of blend together. Even in the studio world, it's sort of sometimes you're the guitarist, but you also kind of help with the production. Everything kind of blends together. So the thing is that working with indie artists and coming up, they don't have the budget or the resources to have multiple people doing just one person per job. So you kind of do everything, or many things, I should say. So coming up, having to run the tracks, program the tracks, be the music director, all for one artist, I learned how to do everything. And I still do that. Even when I music direct, I like to have control of the tracks. I like to be able to make the show intros and transitions because I know what I want to hear and I know how to go from, point A to point B. And also I will run the tracks as well in rehearsal, sometimes in the live shows too. That's a separate skill. Sometimes there are people who all they do is just run the tracks. And that's awesome when that happens. And when it doesn't, that's cool too, because I know what I want to hear. So when we're in rehearsals, I can turn things up and down. I don't have to tell anyone else to do it. I can just do it on myself. And that makes me and anyone who can do more, just more valuable.
Absolutely. So for someone that might want to build that skill set of building tracks, give us or running tracks and building them. Give us an idea of like what the starting point setup might be for like a rig that you would bring out.
Totally. And that's the amazing thing about technology is that it just evolves and it just becomes something that is so easy nowadays. I was talking to a friend of mine who is an OG playback engineer, and he was showing me pictures of his setup in the 80s. And I was just like, how in the world were like just racks and racks of these like old computers with like discs, like floppy discs. I forgot what they're called. I'm just like,
Yeah,
I don't
floppy
know how you're anyways, nowadays, all you need is a preferably two laptops, but one laptop and one audio interface. There's this company called iConnectivity. They make these interfaces called the Play Audio 12, which is one interface, and you can run two computers with 10 outputs. It's amazing. I mean, it's a fairly new thing, 4 years, not that new, but even before then, you have to have like two interfaces and in a splitter. And that was like a whole thing you got to carry and a ton of money. This thing is like $600. It's amazing. So if you're getting started on that route, laptop and that, your DAW of choice. I personally like Ableton Live. That's my thing. I think that's like the easiest thing, especially nowadays for pitching tracks, and speeding them up and slowing them down. Ableton, Pro Tools, and Digital Performer, I would say, are the top three most flexible DAWs. And that's really all you need, which is amazing to think about.
Yeah, it's wild. I would love to see that picture of what that rig used to look like. So you mentioned the
Yeah.
importance of having two computers. For someone that might
Yes.
not know why that is, why is it important to have two computers running?
Oh goodness. So when you have a live show and you have tracks, especially as the show gets bigger, everything is synced to your playback track. So what I mean by that is like not only are you running the backing tracks and the click for the band and the artist, but the lighting, all the lights, all the video, everything is synced to you because it all has to come from one place. There's too much going on in a big pop show for things to be manual all the time. They have to be perfect every time for show reasons and for like safety reasons too. If a stage has to move at a certain point, it has to be synced correctly every time to the playback track. So what happens is that, I mean, laptops are great nowadays and they're very sturdy, especially if you use in my opinion, Ableton Live is the best one. It's a little more reliable in my opinion, but any DAW works. But it's technology, right? Like how many times have you been on your phone and it glitches out or the internet doesn't work for some reason? And that sometimes happens. Sometimes people will bump into your laptop and the USB cable will come unplugged. It's happened before. So the two computers are running at the exact same time. If the first one fails, the other one picks it up automatically. And it just, again, it goes back to if you have two, you have one. If you have one, you have none. So being able to have that peace of mind is like, especially, going in on live TV, can't mess up. That's the thing with playback. There's no room for error. If you mess up, if you're playing guitar on a show, you hit a wrong chord. Yeah, that's not good. But if you playback goes down or you mess up an edit, people notice like that. There's no going around that, unfortunately.
Right. And so you mentioned, you quickly mentioned earlier, iConnectivity is the company that
Yep.
makes the device that will connect the two computers together on one interface.
Yep.
Is there a name for the interface?
It's called the Play Audio 12. Yeah,
Awesome.
and just to say, like, I do know the owner. He's an amazing person, but I use their gear regardless or not. Whether I know, like, this isn't a plug. This is like the best gear that there is. I mean, you could go a little fancier. And Motu makes great things, but then you start having to have multiple ones, and kind of becomes a lot for, especially if you're starting out.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's what I was thinking with starting out. If you have to have two interfaces and then you have to learn how to sync those interfaces together, it's just another piece. But it's great to be able to have one device operate two computers, easy to plug in and set up. That's great. So something that I've found to be in the Nashville recording industry side of things, there's a pretty strong separation for the most part, with a few exceptions, between playing in the studio and playing live. There's the group of, and when you get to the top tier level of the industry, there's the players that are studio guys, and that's almost 100% what they do. And then there's people that are live people, and that's almost 100% what they do, with little exceptions here and there. Have you found that to be a challenge at all in your world? And if so, how have you navigated it? Or have you found that it's more about just kind of finding the tribe, being connected within that, and then you can kind of slide between the studio and live thing pretty well?
Yeah, that definitely does happen here. I would say, I think sometimes it could be just because people see you doing one thing and they kind of think of you as that person, or I think sometimes when you get to the top of being, and I don't consider myself to be, in the likes of guys like Tim Pierce, but when you get to that point, you're like, well, why do I want to go on the road? Like, I could just stay home and play on records. I find that sliding in between that isn't super difficult. I would say, like, sometimes sliding in between, like, music directing and playing and playback and producing, sometimes people see you as, like, they'll call you for that one thing, but you're like, hey, I can do other things. That's just a challenge that comes up, and it's just something you deal with, and you deal with it in the best way that you can. I don't know if I have necessarily advice for that. It's just, doing your job, keep doing your job as well as you can. But I would say, if you're looking to transition, maybe going from studio to live or live to studio, or just be able to do both, I would make relationships with the people who are producing. If you're trying to, become a studio guitarist, or the people who are playing on those records, because they're going to call you when they can't do it, and vice versa.
Absolutely. So you mentioned, when you're someone like yourself that has a number of different skill sets, depending upon the individual that you're working with, it can become a challenge to navigate how you get pigeonholed into the thing that they think that you do, but you do these other things, and it's great to be able to have those skill sets, which increases the value that you would have. But your value to one person could be different than your value to another person. Have you found any creative ways to be able to maybe introduce someone that looks at you as being like studio guitarist, to the fact that you'd be able to like build tracks, for them? How do you help create visibility around the other skill sets that you have, when you're not necessarily called from that person to do it, but you want them to be aware that you do that stuff,
Yeah.
without like handing them a business card with it opens up into like a human-sized scroll of all the things that you have the capability to do?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. Absolutely. I would say with things with the music business, this is sort of just like an overall thing, is like, I would say play the long game. Don't force things, don't shove things down people's throat. I would say, like, you can mention it, be like, oh yeah, I also, build tracks and do this. But what I found is, like, sometimes people just don't need it. It's not even that they pigeonholed you. Is that, like, look, I don't need this thing that you do. And it's not a bad thing. It's just that they don't need it. But I would say continuing, mentioning it to them, be like, oh yeah, I did this casually, how was your weekend? Or I haven't seen you in a while. What have you been up to? Well, I did this thing. And, they sort of come to the realization on their own. And it's unfortunate, because, like, we want to do things now. We want to see the success in the results now. But I think the music industry is a long game kind of thing. You plant seeds. Like, for example, I started working with a person recently who I've known for 4 years. And we talked about working together for the longest time. It just wasn't right. He was on the road, I was on the road, or just the right opportunity didn't come up. But we nurtured the relationship, we stayed friends, and now we're working together, and it's a natural thing. And I know that may be tough for people to hear, because, like, that's so long. but forcing it, I find doesn't work. And it won't always be 4 years, you know, it's just like being natural. That's the thing. And being like, an easy process that you're not shoving down people's throat. But we do have the advantage of social media nowadays. So what I would do, especially in the beginning, when I just played guitar and was trying to get more into MDing and show programming, I would just post videos of me, what I did. You know, like, hey, I'm doing this thing for this artist, check this out. Or like record videos of myself playing a guitar part that I would do in the studio. We have the power of social media, and it's a powerful thing that if we know how to take advantage of, it can get us, you know, people will see you in that new light. Because it's also one thing for you to tell people, I do this thing, but when they see you do it and they hear you do it, they're like, got it. That makes sense to me now.
Absolutely. Man, it's so powerful.
Yeah.
And I just had a similar realization to that. I mean, we're always kind of on social media sharing the different types of things that we do around the studio. And I'm in a similar boat where we provide a wide variety of different audio and visual services to different types of artists. But something that I would be more known for would be, you know, producing records with artists, you know, full production type stuff. But I posted a snippet from an acoustic, a series of acoustic videos that we did with an artist. And literally like 2 hours later, I got a phone call from someone that said, hey, I've been thinking about doing an acoustic thing. And I just saw that you guys were doing that, you know, that sort of thing. But if I hadn't shared that, they would have, you know, no idea.
Exactly.
And then if I would have just randomly started calling people and say, hey, do you need an acoustic thing? I probably would have turned off quite a bit of people before I found that person that actually, you know, needed that thing. So it's such good advice, you know, for you to say that just the understand of the long game, being patient and allowing it to come around, you know, when it needs to. I think it can be a challenge in the modern music industry and the career path of a modern musician, because we're told so often that it's so important to wear a lot of hats and have a lot of different skills, you know, and it's kind of, you hear people say, you know, these days you kind of got to be able to do everything. And then when you get the opportunity to build a relationship with a new client, now you want them to know everything that it is that, you know, that you do.
Yeah.
But I've found that, and as you mentioned, that can, you know, sometimes be a detriment to the relationship, because it's sort of like information overload to them. And they're like, man, I want to work on this guitar overdub right now. You know, and you're telling me how you can run these, you know, put a show together with, you know, this other thing. It's not necessarily what they need, you know, in the moment. But through doing it, through sharing it, through social media, people will be aware, and they'll come to you when they need to. And I think that's just such great advice that you gave, because we get so pushed into that idea of having to have all these skill sets, you know, in order to survive. And which I agree that it's strong to have those things, but maybe we don't always need to let everyone know at the same time let one person know at the same time all of the things that we need, when they just need one thing from us.
Absolutely. And to say to that as well is like, and it is true, you have to know how to do multiple things nowadays. It just is what it is. But it's one of those things that's like, you should know, but I don't, like, for example, like let's say you go to someone's Instagram bio and you see they're like, I'm a writer, producer, musician, entrepreneur, life coach, and, you know, and you're like, cool. Who do you know that does all those things amazingly? It may be that you can do those things, but it's like you have 3 or 4 skills that those are your like selling skills. Those are the things that people hire you for. And then you're also able to do other things that supplement that, but maybe not necessarily what you're going to be hired to do, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So, because it is daunting. Like you're like, oh my God, I have to learn how to mix and master, and I have to, oh my God, I have to learn how to build my own speaker and make my own samples, and like, you know what I mean? You're like, no, like, you know, it's a balance, you know, of being able to do that as well. Because the way that I look at it is like, you don't hire one person to produce, record, mix, master, advertise your record, right? Like some people are really good at doing multiple things, but it's like being good at really good at a couple of things, and then having the other skill sets to supplement that. I think that's a good way of looking at it, in my opinion.
Absolutely. Yeah, and great advice, and a cool thing to bring up from the social media side of things is how we present ourselves and put ourselves out there within the, you know, the digital space. It can quickly be a turnoff, I think, when you see that in your bio, where this person does basically everything, you know.
Yeah.
and then you really don't know how that person could be of value to you because they kind of just do everything. But figuring out what that thing is, that sort of niche that can then be built out around, can be really great. And personally, for me, the way that I started to approach that was thinking more about a purpose behind my work, and then allowing that purpose and intention behind how I serve an artist to be able to evolve within the skill sets that I use in order to serve them in that way. Basically, creating like a personal mission for the type of work that I do and the type of experience that I'd like to to give to an artist. Have you thought about anything like that in your own career in a way that you would describe like what your mission or purpose is, and how you present yourself within the digital space when it comes to trying to be introduced to new potential collaborators?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you have to have a purpose. You have to have your. I read this book by Simon Sinek, and it's called "Start with Why." And what Simon means by why is like your reason for doing what you do. And I think you have to have that because that's how you carry yourself in every position. And I would say, my why is, I grew up going to concerts and seeing the joy that a concert or song brings to people, and I was like, I want to be part of that. And that is always my why, always my purpose. I want to give myself in the best way that I can, whether that's just guitar, music directing, producing, whatever it is that I can do to create that magic. I think working on the business side of things, you sort of see how the sausage gets made, and that, it's a business. Things go wrong and things are not exactly what you want them to be, but there is still magic in that music. There's still, I still get goosebumps when I listen to new music and music that I like, and that is a beautiful thing. So I always think of that as, even if things aren't going the way that I planned or like things are taking a turn, I always think whatever session I go into, I want to bring happiness and a good vibe and good spirit so that this song or this album that we're working on is the best it can be and it can reach the most people that it can. And that magic is still there, even though we work in it every day and it is our jobs. For other people who may be having a bad day and they go to a concert and it makes their day better. I know that did that for me the other day. I went to a concert and I forgot about all, things I got going on in my life. So it's that magic is there. And I tried to just be a part of that magic and bring my help however I can in a positive way.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great point and great book that you mentioned that I think
Oh
every
yeah.
every every creative should read because it's a challenging business, and it has a lot of ups and downs. It's a crazy, road, and if you don't have something to center your intention on a day-to-day basis and help you get through all the crazy adversity that we get kicked in the face with, you get burnt out, and it becomes challenging to survive the madness if we don't have something bigger than ourselves to be able to drive us and kind of come back to. And so you mentioned the importance of having that why in order to understand what your intention is and how you would work with clients. But what I also love is that you mentioned that you can use it in times that are more challenging to be able to get back to your focus. And have you found that to be the case that when there's a turning point in your career, or you're reaching a place where you're trying to figure out where that next stage is going to be, that coming back to your why can sort of reinvigorate that process and help guide you through it?
100%. I mean, it's sort of like centering yourself because sometimes you forget why you're doing it, because you're like, yeah, I got to make a living and do the things that I have to do in order to continue my business. But at the end of the day, like we're so blessed to be able to make music for a living that people pay us money to literally play an instrument, and I think that we forget that sometimes. And after you do it a certain amount of times and you do it, it becomes a normal thing. And you're like, oh my goodness, like this is such a blessing. So when you have those bad days, and I have them all the time, they happen. Like I'm sure, that's one thing that I, like to be clear with people about is that like, and I think this has become more of a thing now, people sharing, their struggles and their bad times. No one, social media may have you thinking that that people are having a better day than you, they have a better career than you, and that they've never done anything wrong in their lives, and that's not the case. Especially speaking to people one on one, we all have difficulties. We all still do. People who you won't think like have bad days or that they have troubles in their career. That we all do, and we all have to take that time and center ourselves. And sometimes the best thing to do is shut the laptop off, go do something else, sleep. Did you sleep? Did you eat? Are you drinking enough water? Because deadlines are crazy sometimes, and things can get, you working on something, and all of a sudden an artist emails you, and a producer's calling you, and you're like, oh my God, and you have deadlines. So centering yourself, remembering what you do, remembering what you're there for is so helpful.
Absolutely. Are there any specific practices that you take to be able to, find that balance and keep that perspective, or any things that you do on a daily or weekly or sort of like ritual kind of basis to keep your mind right?
I don't have any rituals. I should. I try to meditate when I can. I'm not going to say that I'm a meditating person that does it all the time. I try to. I would say doing whatever is fun to you. I love watching comedy. When I, put on a funny video or a movie, that's always helpful. I like to sleep. Sleeping just, I feel that like takes all the pressure away, going on a walk. I know that sounds so simple. Everyone says it, but it's true. Sometimes the answer's staring you right in the face and you can't see it. But when you go out and you get out of the studio, you get out of the instrument, like you're trying to figure out a guitar part, and you're like, I can't figure this out. I'm like, cool, I'm gonna go step outside. I go on a walk, and all of a sudden, there, cool, back to the studio. And it's funny how it works like that. A great book I would recommend, it's not so much on the business side, but about music. It's called The Music Lesson. I think it's by Victor Wooten.
Mm-hmm.
It's a wonderful book. It talks about that, about just like being open to receiving the information, and whether that's a problem that you're having with business or musically or whatever it is, just like being open to that is super helpful.
Absolutely, I agree. Yeah, and such a great book. We're going to help people fill up their library today. It's going to be.
I know. I'm glad we all read that. It sounds like we read all the same books.
Yeah, man. So I think another challenge that creatives in general face, but especially musicians, is the controlling our jealousy when we're seeing people around us get that gig that we wish that we would have had, or seeing their career kind of move in a different pace or a different time than ours does. Is there anything that you've learned about how to navigate those thoughts and perspective, and where to pull yourself back into reality and focus on your own lane and running your own race in the process?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. I mean, you're asking all the good stuff. I mean, let's be honest. We all do it. We all compare ourselves. Social media doesn't make it any easier, because you open up your phone and you're literally bombarded with what everybody is doing, which is insane. It's normal for us, but think about that. I don't think our minds are equipped for that. And I think the first thing to know is like, I think you gotta like be happy for the people, because you're like, you think about yourself, like I know I work so hard and have worked so hard, but so has everybody else, and they deserve the success that's coming to them. I don't like to say like that person doesn't deserve it. No, everybody who's successful, who has achieved something, deserves it. They worked hard. You don't see their blood, sweat, and tears. You don't see their troubling times or their doubts and their fears, or the times that they wanted to give up. So you gotta like give them props for that. Another thing that I would also say is like, sometimes things aren't what they seem. People can post about a gig, and this has happened to me in the past, where I see a friend, they post a gig on tour, and it's like a stadium filled with people. They'll come back from tour. I'll go hang out with them. I'm like, hey, how was that tour? And they were like, it was awful. This bad thing happened, and then this thing happened, and then management did this. And you're like, but if you were to look at the picture, they look real happy. And that caption, they're like, I'm so honored to be, so things aren't what they seem. Some people aren't monetarily compensated for what they're actually doing for one reason or another. Sometimes it's their choice, and sometimes it's not up to them. But you don't see that, because most people aren't going to go on social media and say, hey, we had this really bad thing happen today, for whatever it may be. So just remembering that thing, like you cannot compare your, Instagram, social media as a highlight reel. You cannot compare that highlight reel to your bloopers, because everything that you've ever messed up on in your entire life. And you're comparing all those failures to one person's success at that one time that may not even be as great as you think it is. Mm-hmm. Or even it may be too, but you can't, it's just like being happy for the people, because also you want them to be happy for you. When you post something and you're proud of, like, you don't want people to be like, that, you don't deserve this. Like, are you kidding? Like, I work hard for this. I did a lot to get here. So you want people to be happy for you too. So being happy for others is like important.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's great advice. And I think that we can, in that case, we're showing our happiness for others, and then being able to look at our own situation and be grateful for the environment that we're in. Do we have breath in our lungs and a heartbeat and roof over our head? All of those things are great. And there's great things that are on the horizon as well. Everyone's path just might take a little bit of a different turn. Things are gonna peak and valley at different times, and just being aware of that, I think is really important, and something that doesn't get talked about as much. I don't think. Everyone, we talk about the gear and the process and how to EQ a guitar and what amp to use and that sort of thing, but these internal battles and the mindset and stuff that goes into it, I think we need to shed more light on that, because it's so important and can really change the perspective that we have. And I think the ability for us to be at our optimal creativity, if our mind can be in the right spot.
Absolutely. And one thing to add to that is like, we're living our lives in this moment. Sometimes things don't make sense until you have had months or a year to pass by and look at it and go, oh, look at that thing that happened that I thought was a bad thing was actually a good thing. For example, I recently was up for a tour. It was between me and one other person, with an artist that I really wanted to work with, to music direct and play, and I didn't get the tour. Another person got it, and I was pretty bummed. I was like, wow, I really wanted that tour. I really wanted to go out. And then I got this other gig that, if things go the way that I think they will from meeting certain people in that gig, it'll pan out in the long run way better than if I had done that tour. Would it have still been fun to go on that tour? Absolutely. And I'm a little bummed. I'm happy for the other person. I'm a little bummed it didn't work out. But you just don't know until you've had a year to look back and be like, wow, that thing was actually a blessing that this opportunity fell through, or I didn't get that gig. I know, and it's hard because like when it happens to you in the moment, you're like, no, oh, this sucks. And it's easy to tell other people, but it's just like one of those things that like you'll look back and say, oh wow, that was the right thing. Like, the universe of this music business just works in mysterious ways, or you just never know. It's wild.
Yeah, man.
It's the Wild West out here.
Yeah, absolutely. The most mysterious ways.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's insane. I think the thing that I've continued to pull out from you from like the start of our discussion until now is just focusing on the long term, and being in the moment to say yes to things when it makes sense, and to understand when you need to say no and do the work to be able to get ready for that, and to build those relationships, and to not get down on yourself when that one thing doesn't happen because something else might be right around the corner, and just looking at every step that you take and decision that you make, every opportunity that you have to push you that is setting you up for that next thing. And that's the whole beauty of the creative process, is that we get to go on this long, crazy journey that becomes our life, and what a great way to be able to to spend it. I love that, man. And I think that the phrase that I use a lot for myself is to proceed with patient persistence, because I think it's I've learned that it's so challenging as a creative, like you said, to find patience, because we want that thing to happen now, and whether that's finding the right tone or getting that gig or making that that move happen. But we just have to let the journey happen as it goes. But we also can't sit idly to wait for opportunity to happen. So we have to persist and consistently, but just be patient during that process and action of persisting. And I love that you're echoing that with just focusing on the long term. And I just feel really, really connected with that way of approaching a career. And I think it'll be really valuable for everyone that's listening.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to have to write that down. Patient persistence. I'm going to have to put that up here in my studio, as a reminder. Because again, like you said, once you're living in it, it's hard to see. It's hard to it's easy to get frustrated, and it's normal to get frustrated, but playing that long game. And also, letting it flow, but working hard. You can't just sit back, like you said, and expect things to come to you. That'll never happen, unfortunately. I wish it would.
Yeah, absolutely, man.
Yeah.
So something that you've delved into, and especially with joining us, today, is sharing your experiences to give back and to give knowledge and insight for the people that are where we were, 15, 20 years ago. What inspired you to get into doing that, and why do you think it's important to share these stories and this information?
Yeah, when I first moved to LA, I didn't know anybody. I knew two people from back home in Florida. I reached out to them and I said, "Hey, you want to meet up?" Crickets. No response. And I'm just like, wow, like I just moved to this town and I wasn't even asking for music advice. I was just moved to this town. And these people don't even give me the time of day to respond and say, "Hey, you should check out this place," or just like, "Hey, yeah, let's grab a phone call," or something. And I remember early on in my career as well, like I would reach out to certain people as social media gained a following, or social media gained traction and became bigger. And it's kind of the same thing. They were, to them, these secrets were like industry secrets and they were the gatekeepers, and I couldn't have access to this information. But then there were people that I reached out to who were angels in my life and who took the time when I didn't have a gig or anything. And they took the time to have coffee with me and to sit me down and say, "This is how things work. This is the information you're looking for." And I remember that being such a blessing, and looking back and saying, I would not be where I am had those people who really had nothing to gain by taking the time to talk to me. They had nothing to gain and they still helped me and got me so much farther along. So I want to be that blessing to people, in any way I can, because this industry's tough. It's really hard. And if I can help other people achieve their dreams in any way, I'm down to do that. And I think that frame of mind is becoming more popular now. There are more people who are sharing not only industry secrets, like production secrets, guitar secrets, like I call them secrets, but information. That's what it is. The internet has sort of taken down that barrier, and there's very little that you can't find out now, which I think is amazing. Because the thing is that, like, I think when you do that, it's like a scarcity mindset. Like you're like, "No, you're gonna take all my gigs if I teach you this." And it's like, no, you're not. Like you can give somebody, the same tools that you have, and they may not be able to build the house that you have, or they may build a different house, using those same tools. And it's just like one of those things that also encourages you to keep learning and to keep growing as well.
Absolutely. Well, I'm so happy that you were willing to be able to chat with us, and that you see the value of sharing our experiences to be able to help move the industry forward. And I think that, as you mentioned, we get so much from what we're giving out too, and being able to help people's careers start to, evolve and take off, and getting a message from someone that, says, "Man, that piece of advice that you gave me, it helped me get this gig, or it helped me get this track right." And then, it's just another way to be fulfilled through using the talent and skills that we were blessed with to be able to have, and to help it have an impact, in a way that's different than just playing on records. And I love that you see that, that value and importance. So thanks so much for joining us, man.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure. You asked some amazing questions, and I hope this helps people. And I always tell people, like, I'm always here. If anybody ever needs to reach out to me, or I'm on all the webs, all the social medias, and I'm always happy to help. Any way I can. So thank you for having me. This is really fun.
Thank you, man. It was a blast.